Radio Against Repression. Radio Against Repression.
Welcome to Radio Against Repression. You're listening to 88.4. 88.4, it's a free radio in Berlin, and you can listen to us also 90.7 in Potsdam. Or you can stream us via the internet. You can find us, in the internet, 88.4 Berlin. My name is Jules, and you're listening to Radio Against Repression. The show's title is The Third Encampment, and we are a monthly show about repression in Germany, especially repression against the political activists, against the genocide in Palestine and in Gaza. This show is called The Third Encampment, and will start with a small voices and also sounds from the camp in front of the Bundestag in Berlin, the camp against the war in Palestine and the genocide in Palestine. So you are invited to stay with us for the next hour and to listen to our recorded sound that we brought here in the radio.
Radio Against Repression. Radio Against Repression. Radio Against Repression.
We can and actually have to confront the perpetrators also right here in the midst of Germany, in the as they say, the
belly of the beast.
The belly of the beast, yeah, exactly. Im Herzen der Bestie in German. This is something I think, for example, I'm also a Palestinian. I mean, my family stems from Khalil, from Hebron. We have been expelled generations before, lived in most of my relatives live in Jordan. My family lives in Germany for like 3 generations. You know, my political conscience is obviously motivated by that history of mine. But also, it's just oriented by understanding myself as someone living and actually facing oppression in Germany. You know, I always like to say home is where oppression is.
Yeah.
Home is where oppression is. I mean, in a way, Palestine is kind of my home. I've been there twice. I had to enter it as a German tourist with a German passport, kind of technique. Of course, they recognize me as a Palestinian and treated me accordingly. But yeah, for example, to me, it wouldn't be like regarding what I said before, that I see it as a global system where you have to confront the belly of the beast. I don't see it as a reasonable demand to say, I personally, I'm a Palestinian, I want to return to Palestine. I mean, I want Palestine to be free so that people can enter and see it and live there, but this is not what motivates my activism so that I can kind of return. Let's face it, I mean, colonialism has been successful in Palestine in many ways, and my family is uprooted. We don't own anything in Palestine. I don't have any papers who say I'm a Palestinian. I have a Jordanian and German passport. Actually, quite privileged, 2 passports, but nothing that says I'm a Palestinian. So, okay, this is historical injustice, and it motivates my political struggle, but not in the sense that I want to return history, because I don't think this is possible in general. And I think any solution lies in the way forward in the future, and any fight that we take up should be a fight for future. I certainly want to see also this geography in Central Europe, Germany, being in a sense liberated by oppressors that we have here. Capitalists, fascists, warmongers. I mean, people are maybe this is again something that international audience is interested in. The way German politicians talk about war is intimidating. There's a huge escalation. Since Ukraine war began, then again, since 7th of October, like the escalation has been constant, even more so since the war between Iran and Israel broke out. They are very openly speaking about making Germany kriegstauglich. This is a very central term in German politics. It means to make Germany fit for war. Yeah. And they're talking about the Zeitenwende, a change of tides, a new era kind of, which is in their sense facing towards a real possibility of fighting a war, a German army being like active on the ground in some kind of war. Yeah. Already this is kind of like set for sure. They will bring back the draft. The military draft. This is also in preparation.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah. It's kind of already, and they.
Yeah, I heard about a couple of years ago. I heard this, and then it went quiet. Yeah, you're right. And Rheinmetall is now the main economic power in Germany, right? It overtook Volvo like a month ago or something.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's on a war footing, you would say, in England.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The camp is a place where people of all strides can meet. Groups that normally otherwise organize among themselves or sort of more stay among themselves. It really is a third space for people to come together. It's a space where we can do events that otherwise just don't have venues. It's a space where everything gets connected from the cultural around Palestine to the political. It's a space where we annoy Friedrich Merz personally, which I think is very valuable. This morning we also annoyed Kai Wegner personally. So Friedrich Merz is the Chancellor of Germany, and Kai Wegner is the current mayor of Berlin. Both of them absolute genocide apologists and genocide deniers. So annoying them personally is always a pleasure. And it's a space where we can bring visibility to the Palestinian cause and hopefully open some people's minds and hearts.
Hallo. Guten Abend, good evening, مساء الخير, yak shamlar, bonsoir, buongiorno. My name is Wasim Muqdad and I play the oud, and I will try to make some nice tunes for you today evening. The first piece was like a collage of some Palestinian and Syrian traditional songs. The next one is a song from Palestine.
These are the people who could tell the next generation that they actually did something. I mean, this is again West society, again in this country, watching that happening, and they won't have excuses. I mean, this stuff with Gaza, I mean, what would be the excuse of this society of letting that happen? Some verkackte Staatsräson or whatever they call it. I mean, you cannot even, it's not even a good joke. And I mean, look, 20 months and the camp is the camp, but it's not bigger than it used to be. And the German society itself, the core of the society, the liberal part of the society, didn't really do one step in their direction. And they are the ones who are, in 20 years, they are the ones who will have to answer for it. I mean, to be honest, that's not what should make the Palestinians in Gaza or here feel better. But I mean, that's the minimum or a person, you know, can actually do. At least tell himself, I did what I could. I think what is really common to most of these people here, that they all have this complexity of still everything I do is not enough. Like really, this is like the vibe around us, that everybody who's actually active always have this bad conscience that it's not enough. But look around you, man. This is for me as a human being, kind of an important aspect. Your children, you want to tell them where you were. And I mean, German liberal society is institutionally took people like Stauffenberg and made a mythos out of them. It's not like the people don't have this concept of where a crime is happening, you should stand against it. But you know, in this case, there's so much racism involved, so much fetishism of the Jewish concept and Israeli concept that, like, obviously they're able not to do anything.
Yeah, they're enabled to do nothing. For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
The problem is not that so much attention was given to the crime against the Jews and too less attention to the crimes against the Roma Sinti, for example. The problem is that they weren't put together at first place on the universal level, you know? I mean, the crime against the Jews was a special crime, but it was, first of all, a crime against humanity. This is really, this is why I feel very comfortable walking among non-Jewish people, among Palestinians, Christians, whatever, you know, if it's Jews, Christians, or Muslims, Palestinians, Israelis, or Germans, I couldn't care less, as long as the message is universal. And I have to say that the pro-Palestinian solidarity movement in Berlin has, in big part, earned a lot of respect because they weren't tempted to go that direction, and they kept it very universal. And I don't need to feel uncomfortable coming to a place like this, because it's completely normal. Like, people just ask here the German government in that case if this really is still a protest against the German government or whatever, you know, society, call it whatever you want. To just, you know, see the universality of this matter. Yeah, I mean, this is what racism is. It's the lack of universality among people.
It's a question really about what is the value of this for the broader struggle for Palestinian freedom.
This is probably the most difficult question, but if we are treating this as a struggle of developing consciousness, as in the true sense of war of position, I think there's the Palestinian Solidarity Movement in Berlin is now been active for 20 months, which is really unbelievable. And demonstrations and this kind of stuff are still happening all the time. And at least around me, most of the people didn't give up. And I think they can even, first of all, that's already a success.
Yeah.
Already a success for any other fight for solidarity in this society, which is obviously going politically now in the completely other direction. So I don't know if people are aware of it, but I really do believe that this is inspiring for more passive parts of society, which are just, you know, still didn't do the first step. So, you know, it's probably the most demonized group right now in Germany, just last 2 years, but at the same time, it has this function of staying with it, and I'm sure that's very inspiring for many people who are still not, maybe they're not even aware of it and can tell this to themselves, but I'm sure it's the case. I know it also from my own private cycle. I know many students, for example, are looking at these activities, and at the beginning they were, because it was demonized so much, it was like, you know, this is something which we should be careful of, but you could see the last 1st of May protest that it has actually much more solidarity around it, although the police, of course, were trying to separate the Palestinian part from the rest of the demonstration. At the end, everybody there, they got more strength in this last 2 years exactly from these kinds of actions. Absolutely, I'm completely sure about that. And this is really like the crème de la crème of the society. These are people who, you know, I mean, okay, you know, I mean, we shouldn't make out of it an too heroic act, but they come and sit and sleep on outside on the grass. Police is driving them nuts. I think it's psychologically a very, very, very difficult experience. So we shouldn't underestimate it. And for me, just as somebody who's trying to do some activism, it's very inspiring.
You just heard some voices out of the protest camp in front of the Bundestag in Berlin, Bezetzung, gegen Bezatzung. It's a camp which tries to raise a lot of things, or do a lot of things for the Palestinian perspectives and also for the awareness of the ongoing war and genocide that is still going on. And my colleague Alex, who is with me here in the studio, hello Alex.
Hey, hi Jules.
Have been there for a lot of times now, because the camp is already set up since 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah, I think we're at the end of the third week on Friday tomorrow. Yeah.
So Alex, you've been there for quite some times, and you talked to a lot of people. You recorded all these voices that we just heard out of the camp and all these impressions. So maybe for all the listeners outside there, why putting these voices on the radio? Why do you decide to bring this to us in our show today?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think primarily the site is a point of convergence. So the camp is really a place that, as we heard some of the voices saying, it's where lots of groups come together. And I guess the goal is that lots of different listeners will be able to have access to the concerns and to this particular set of very specific perspectives around what's going on, right? I'm just one person, and these are also even just maybe like 5 or 6 voices. But nonetheless, I think it shows that the whole ethos of the camp is come and organize, come and do your thing. Don't turn up, maybe turn up and ask some questions to begin with. But after a certain amount of time, the impetus is really to come and organize yourself, have meetings, do workshops. So I'm trying to pick up on that kind of proactive energy that's there. And I also think that we have a clip in a minute, which is about how it looks and how it kind of presents itself visually, because I think with radio, maybe we can reach some people who haven't really made their mind up yet, whether they want to come down or whether they want to join this kind of thing in the future if something like this pops up around them. And maybe visualizing it through sound to begin with is one way to encourage that, to think about that.
Radio Against Repression is a monthly show that you can listen to on air at 88.4 or 90.7 in Potsdam, but you can also stream it as a podcast. We had different shows, so I'm very happy that you brought this topic up, because I think that these voices, it's very hard to get in the media. It's one of the reasons why we set up this show also, them to bring these topics to the media, to give topic spaces that normally don't have spaces. So I'm really happy that you brought all these voices to our show today, and I hope, dear listeners outside, maybe, if you want to hear it, if you couldn't follow everything, or you have to turn off now, or have to go sadly to work, I don't know what, you can hear it online. You just have to type Radio Against Repression podcast, and you will find some other episodes.
So, hi, Alex. We have here a large tent, celebratory tent, that has a big banner on the side, one on the top that says right to resist, right to return. We have a police van driving by. We are outside. We have a beautiful little smaller pavilion. Both of them have Palestine flags all over them. There's a bunch of people here sitting, chanting, drumming, eating, and that's Occupy Against Occupation for you.
So we are here on a meadow right in front of the German parliamentary building, the Bundestag. Regarding what I'm witnessing here, like the moment one enters this area, one comes close from, for example, a nearby train station, the first thing you see is police cars, a whole bunch of them, a fence around the meadow. So it's very, very much guarded. There's a huge and kind of intimidating police presence. As I know from experience, sometimes it's a bit more, a bit less. But there's always like at least, I mean, right now I think it's 8 big buses. Yeah. But people are around. There are a number of big tents where people gather. There's one for like a reception where people can kind of introduce themselves, get to know the organizers. There's one for food and drink. And there are the tents on one side where people sleep in. People are just sitting around, keeping up the camp, doing all kinds of works, chairs, preparing. I think someone is preparing posters for the big demonstration.
We're near the Reichstag, and we're, how far are we? Is that like 500 meters or something? I don't know. I know the river's over there, and the long Strasse de Sainte Uni, this street goes all the way down, so we're just not too far from the Reichstag. So it's right in front of the government, and there's also a tent here, a large tent, which has sort of basic facilities for people like eating and stuff like that. And then, behind me is maybe 20 tents or something, 15. And then I see other like sculptures and stuff. So this is a public park as far as I know. So I think legally we're allowed to be here, and there's trees and stuff as well. It's a very nice open space. And there's also barriers that police have put up to segregate the actual reality of the genocide from the non-reality that most of Germany is living inside, and perhaps the rest of the world, you know. That's how I describe it.
You heard impressions from the camp Bezetzung gegen Bezatzung, or Occupy against Occupation. I'm sorry. And you just heard that the camp is open and the camp have a lot of things. So if you're in Berlin and you're interested, I think you can just go and pass there and ask people what they're doing, and just find out yourself also what's going on in the camp. It's in front of the Bundestag or the Reichstag. So Alex, the title of our show is The Third Encampment. So today you are the expert, and will ask you some questions. Mm-hmm. So why you chose this title?
Thank you. I just quickly say that these recordings were made actually sort of 10 to 15 days ago, and there's now more like 45 tents rather than like 2015. So it has been growing. Obviously it changes with the weather pattern as well a bit, and people's durational kind of strength. The Third Encampment is a title that we came to based, of course, a little bit on this idea of like the third space, which Jara was sort of talking about there in one of the clips, which is that the encampment is but it's somehow between like the state-controlled space and the private space, and it's reclaiming the public space. I think it's interesting. People often say in Berlin that if you want to understand the city, then you have to go back to the land. But actually, this isn't kind of an encampment on like a wasteland somewhere where you would kind of think maybe these sort of like peripheral spaces would hold a kind of peripheral protest. But it's actually a Skulpturenpark, so it's like a sculpture garden opposite the Bundestag, or as it's now referred to as the Reichstag, which we can talk about that shift as well. And so it's kind of maybe the state didn't see it coming. And that relates then to this idea of encampment and this idea of occupation. Obviously, you have like the Third Estate, which is this famous pamphlet that went around immediately before the French Revolution, which was sort of connected to what's going on now, in the sense that one of the propositions there was like, well, we are the masses, we are the people who create all these things and all these services and keep the world running and keep the world going, and yet here is this kind of minority that is extracting all the surplus value from it. And we're in a sort of similar moment now where we have this kind of cancerous billionaire class, the 1%. And I think globally people are starting to really organize and see these connections again, that like, okay, we have effectively like one monarch running the global superpower of the United States. And to be more specific to Germany, we also have like an 85% rejection of selling arms to Israel for Israel's genocide. And so I think it's like, well, if Friedrich Merz is sort of, this represents the 1%, right? Like he's a corporate lawyer. So if he's not the 1% himself, he represents them very much. So it's a rejection of that whole model. And I think that speaks to the moment that we're in politically, yeah.
You brought a lot of other like impressions and stuff for us to listen. So I think maybe for all the listeners, what can we wait for in the episode, or like what will happen in this in the next 40 minutes?
Yeah. So coming up, we have more interviews which get into a bit more of the fine grain of some of the contradictions that are present in the camp. If you speak to people, you're going to get to conversations, or at least I did, conversations about the rights of man, so-called, or human rights, the contradictions within the way in which that was established and how that actually plays out in real life. We speak at the global scale, and then we bring it back down again to the local and the German scale. And then there's also more field recordings and music, which was recorded live at camp. There's a lot to try and pack into this hour, which it's sort of a little bit like the battle between form and content will not be resolved in this Stunde. But I hope that it's, again, sort of a teaser that illustrates ultimately the point of conversion. And one thing also that I was there for this mass rally, which occurred 2 weekends ago now on Saturday. And, what can I, as an individual, possibly do about the situation? Asked 60,000 people, right?
So you did this.
No. Yes.
Nice. So maybe let's continue now. Like if you brought so many impressions, I would be up to listen to more. What's going on in the camp, hear some voices from the camp, and maybe at this point also greetings to everybody who's listening to us.
Yeah. Shout out to everyone at the camp. I'm not in a position to give individual shout outs, nor would it necessarily be such a great idea. And but to everyone who's listening all over, and to everyone that's been supporting the podcast and coming with us on this journey, we really appreciate that.
Just taking up the supposed freedoms of gathering, freedoms of speech that civic state promises us, so that we comply to its contract, basically. These promises are constantly broken regarding this movement and its demands. Since the beginning of this year, no demonstrations have been allowed to walk. Right. They at best allowed us to just stay at one point, having some speeches and chants, and this involved always police violence, people just being arrested on the spot, beaten up during arrest, people like being pushed and hurt just by cops, and threatened, and all the time getting charged with all sorts of things. I think one significant charge that is brought up repeatedly is the slogan "From the river to the sea." Maybe you probably have an international audience. This is something maybe people don't quite know. In Germany, it's a special situation that saying the sentence is completely criminalized in Germany, and particularly in Berlin. Germany is a federal state, and its own police, its own court system, and so on. And the Berlin one is particularly harsh on a number of things regarding police violence and also political repression. For example, regarding this chant, when you say it publicly on a demo, the police starts filming you to kind of gather material to charge you with. They want to have you on tape, saying it, chanting it, and you will charge with a number of completely ridiculous charges. Because, as I said before, these things, these freedoms that they promise us, that this is a German, they say Rechtsstaat, like a state built on law, law and order and so on. In a sense, it is true, but it is predominantly used against us, because they will use the law as a weapon against us. In the case, for example, when you say "From the river to the sea," they will say, "Oh, you are inciting hate. You are this is anti-Semitic because you say that Israel shouldn't exist, and this means you support, murdering 1 million people, expelling them, and so on." This is like implied. this is also a completely ridiculous thing, because a right to exist of a state is not a thing in law. Like you can ask anyone who has like basic understanding. It's not a thing. In my view, I don't think the German state has a right to exist, and I can say it. In the past, there was a different German state, Eastern Germany, that ceased to exist, and this was not like it was a political process that did not involve like crimes. This is completely ridiculous. State in human history, states are built and taken away, start to exist, cease to exist.
Yeah, do you think that they've kind of pushed the idea of like the rights of man too far with the case of Israel, and that actually, as a consequence, in a sense, that global order, that post-world order, is starting to kind of fall apart? I know the rights of man is previous to the Second World War and everything, but...
You mean like human rights? Rights of man?
Yeah, like, I mean, this is I would have thought 19th century, even earlier with French Revolution, right?
Yes, yes.
But they've kind of pushed it so far as a mechanism for extractivist capitalism and all the things,
absolutely,
imperialism, and, ethno-state itself has just pushed the whole thing to the point of breaking.
Yes, very much. Absolutely, I think so. I think a metaphor regarding human rights and international law generally that I recently heard, and I find quite fitting, is that it is a gentleman's agreement. Exactly. It's a gentleman's agreement that is set up between nation states, and not even like the whole nation states in the UN, but particular powerful imperialist powers who have the means to impose their state interest on part of the world, regions, like the US, but I think any capitalist state who has the capabilities of enacting imperialist policies will do it. I think, for example, Russia is certainly an imperialist state. I mean, this first, some people controversial. To me, it's not. So there's a kind of gentleman's agreement, because in between these actors, and they decide to, again, when it fits them, to use the law to support their interests. And if it does not fit them, the law does not have any meaning.
It's very tempting to see the Zionist project as a colonial project of a sort, but I think one should be very clear about what kind of colonial project it is, what kind of imperialistic project it is, and there's a deep contradiction between how the Zionist Jews perceive themselves as colonialists who actually were interested in land, and the perception of how they, in a sense, still as a colony, are profiting or helping to make a profit for, first it was Great Britain, France, and later, till today, United States. So I used to be of that opinion, but I changed my mind. I think we miss a very important, very non-rational aspect of Zionism when we try to analyze it only in terms of creating surplus value for the capitalistic West and for itself. If that was the case,
Yeah.
I mean, you can correct me.
So I think the reference is more to having Palestinians build Israel into the nation and then basically not needing them.
Yeah, that is exactly that aspect shouldn't be exaggerated, because if that would have been the case, I think we could have just be speaking now about a certain kind of apartheid, which would be like the South African case. But you know, Ben-Gurion in 47, 48 didn't think economically, he thought ethnically. Now Israel becomes such a neoliberal capitalistic society that it's almost hard to see that any other logic still commands them. But I do believe that for sure, quote, quote, better use of Palestinian workforce, labor power, could have been made if the idea of this project would have been creating surplus value. And also the other point that there's this idea would have came very early as in very strong contradiction to the idea that the early Zionists thought of themselves as freeing themselves of the prototype of the old anti-Semitic parasite Jew. You know, we went to Palestina to work. You know, now we proved that we labor, and they bought lands and kicked the Falach. You know, the Palestinians who were living there. They weren't. Their idea wasn't like come and stay and work for us. That we will do the work, and it's true that before 7th of October, 300-something thousand Palestinians were working inside Israel legally. For sure, more not legally, which became very difficult since Israel built the wall. But still, we saw that the moment after September 11, Israel found other solutions very easily. They brought people from India to build. You know, when we were doing agriculture, and the second intifada, and the first and second intifada happened, so suddenly you saw workers from Thailand. This aspect exists in every capitalistic society, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of making that this project only about that. I wish it was only about that, because then it would be probably, it wouldn't have come to that Israel would just be looking for a chance to do ethnical cleansing like it is found right now, or at 47 or at 67, or all the other possibilities. I mean, we speak in those terms. We speak about the demographical problem in Israel. The demographical problem that is that at some point you'll have too many Arabs there, and if we want to be a democracy, we'll be in the minority. But this was the case in South Africa, and they just looked and said, better for us. We were not going to give them rights anyway, so they're just going to work for us for cheap, you know. Israel, I have to say, has never treated systematically the Palestinians like that. You have different classes inside the Israeli society, including the Palestinian Arabs, which are getting paid bad for their labor power for many years now. But it's not like we couldn't do without the Palestinians, and it's proved now. Everybody expected, and some people spoke like that. I know Ilan Pape had this idea that the Israeli economy is going to collapse, also because of its dependence on the Palestinians. It's just not, unfortunately, maybe it's not the case.
You are listening to Radio Against Repression. Radio Against Repression have been to the camp in front of the Bundestag in the past weeks, especially my dear colleague Alex, who's with me in the studio.
Hello.
Hello again. Nice that you're listening. You just heard a lot of voices that you recorded, Alex, 10 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
You just said maybe for me, the question would be like, how was it like for you to be in the camp and also to go there? What were your impressions?
Mm-hmm.
What do you expected maybe also before you went there?
Yeah, I mean, I was there just for a couple of nights sleeping, but I've been there, a handful of times, and I'm making it part of my routine. It's not far from where I live, really. The first few days, there were a lot of arrests around Bezetzung, so hate speech, which really brought home the episode that we did with Jason Oberman last episode on hate speech and insult law, which turns out, that's a thing. So that was quite disturbing. And I felt that immediately we were kind of in... it's a paradox because on the one hand, the conditions are awful, but on the other hand, it's great that it can happen. And it feels very important, and it feels very telling how you see people respond to those situations and how you see people kind of rally together over the days and weeks, because it's, a lot of stuff with camp is like cooking and cleaning and basic maintenance of day-to-day life, right? But then you get interspersed with little instances of sort of, poetic moments, like meeting a young man from the Ukraine who was coming through to join the German army to fight against Russia, and actually came and sat with us at the info tent where I spent a lot of time to begin with, like just sort of meeting people and getting into conversation with the public as well. And he came and sat with us for at least half an hour and was talking about this, desire that he's had since he was 7 years old. So for 11 years, he wanted to join the army and fight back against Russia. And this was like really complicated and really rare, I think, opportunity, because also we do not talk really much about this very hot conflict on the border of Europe and in Ukraine, right, where there's 1 million lives have been lost already between both sides. And so this is this kind of like duality of how the time is spent for me at camp. I also could do a lot more. I didn't put a vest on yet, but I'm thinking this is like essentially, if you're going to spend some time there, is again, organize yourself, get into it yourself. And then other like significant impressions that we had were, of course, lots of like singing and dancing and joy, and ways of like different forms of cultural exposure, basically. And one thing I also noticed, which I really appreciate, is like the lack of alcohol. And I was really thinking how different it would be if there was booze on site. And I don't know if there's a law that prevents us from doing that, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, also the gathering and the coming together in these hard struggles is something very important for the fight. Because the world is very rough. Not only the repression that is, for example, the camp has to face, but also a lot of people all over the world have to face. It's very important and can be very like not to lose the fire, not to lose the will to change the situation, and that it's not so that the world do not stay so shitty. You know, it's really important to be nice to each other and to come together.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the shift in perspective for the listener is maybe to think, well, this is not the hottest summer of your life. This is the coolest summer for the rest of your life. So it's not impossible that you will find yourself in like an improvised encampment, which is maybe as policed as heavily as this one, maybe not, within the next like 10 to 15 years of your life, so it's rational to work out where you fit into that, even if it's difficult. And even if you realize that there are like bumps along the way, unless you're part of this like cancerous billionaire 1% class, it's much more likely that you're going to be involved in something like this. And you are needed in something like this, right? It's not a threat, it's a promise, or it's an invitation, really.
Yeah, and it's not only an invitation, it's also important to stand up and to do something. And this can be one way. So people in Berlin, or if you listen to it, you are free to join. The camp is open. You can go there. You can find a lot of people and ideas and new perspectives and joyful nights, as you just said. But also, of course, you also have to be realistic. And there will be a lot of police and there can be violence. But yeah, the world is violent. I don't know.
I wouldn't say it's a violent experience physically, although there are certain like shoving and pushing and stuff. But it's more like that you just feel so surveyed and so like even to the point of speech, right? Like this is something that I'm really just trying to get my head around. Like can I call the government collectively a bunch of turds, or is that a Volksverhetzung, Because that idea that a nation is so bound even by what can be said explains a lot about how that nation acts and performs and the way in which society is structured. And to see it like firsthand like that is like a particular type of barricade, but it's mostly a surveillance, speech, maintained barricade. So it's something. Speaking of speech, I also wanted to throw these last messages into the wind from the camp because there's some really beautiful clips and we are running out of time again, always with Radio Against Repression.
Yeah, so you recorded some people's voices about how the world would be. No, what was it?
Yeah, so I feel like the trick is to try and draw the future nearer through the work, right? Like part of the work is to kind of channel the future into the present because we cannot wait. And this is kind of the provocation for some of these answers, yeah.
So let's go, Radio Against Repression.
First of all, I hope your world is better than ours. I hope you don't have to fight all the time because it's a pleasure and a struggle. And oh boy, I'm gonna get all like philosophical and emotional on this one, but people were resisting so much and putting so much into it, and people ignored it. There's both, so don't let yourself be fooled by the statistics. Don't let yourself be fooled. Not everyone was in the resistance, but the resistance was here and it was strong and it was creative and it was a bunch of beautiful people that gave what they had and what they could for the good fight and the just fight, and I hope you have achieved liberation.
No matter what point we are in history or whatever, how good we think it is, there's always something bad going on. So never be afraid to expose that badness, because they're all afraid over there. These are human beings. They're actually very kind people. I work and I teach and I do all that thing in Germany, but they're just terrified. They don't know how to articulate the problem. So that's my job, is to kind of, I think it's a bit easier for me because just because I had a very lucky, privileged childhood, I've never known personally a huge amount of repression. So that's my message to anybody hearing this in 20 years' time is, no matter how good you think it is, it's going to be, just find out about the dark stuff and do something about it.
So what would be a message that you would maybe want to send to someone listening in 20 years from now?
20 years from now?
This in the rubble.
Oh, wow.
Some smartphone with a podcast still downloaded on it.
Some USB stick or something.
Yeah.
Interesting thought. I mean, I don't know how the world will look like, but I think in any age, in any area, there is something to fight for. Sometimes you get the impression of that you live in a stagnation, that nothing really happens, that the state of oppression seems very, very stable, but things can change immensely in like very short period of time. I think these people just should always bear in mind, even if they live in like very desperate and depressing situation, they should never give up hope and keep up the struggle for the future.
What was your message for people who are listening from outside of Germany?
If you think Germany is bad, wrong. It is a lot worse. I have heard this from many people that they thought Germany was bad and then they came here and they were like, what the fuck? Including Francesca Albanese herself. So please boycott Germany and draw the attention onto Germany's complicity in the genocide in Gaza and its suppression of the Palestine Solidarity Movement here. Because that is one of the few things that Germany does still care about, is how it appears to the outside. We are doing our very fucking best from the inside, and we need the support from the outside. And also, as much as Germany sucks, the center and the focus is Palestine.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Now I need to say hi to this person.
Hey, welcome back. So we're just going to try and do a few community announcements, as is always the pattern with Radio Against Repression. Playing under me now is 2 a.m. on a Silo by T.H. Hamlitz. So let me just try and get through these announcements. We've got Dein HERZ, which is a play by our colleague Jara Nassar that's opening this weekend in Innsbruck. It's about Palestine, family stories, and finding truth. That runs from the 4th until the 6th. Listeners may recognize the track that was in the last section by Khaled Kurber and Roman Khalaf Ensemble. Khaled has a new album coming out, which is called, and I'll do my best to pronounce, Lekuli Fadan Achai, which is to say, to each space its own rhythm. That's on Research Records, coming out on the 18th of July. I've had a bit of a sneak preview, and that's a very special piece. Really looking forward to hearing that around. And just a little self-promotion. I published a book last month called 1001 Accurate Memories, which is about traumatic memory, class, disability, and indeed the failure of memory culture in Germany. So please do check that out on Plural Studio. Shout outs from the camp. I mean, come get organized, but I really think the main request from the camp is to stop the genocide. Jesus Christ. It's insane that this has to be emphasized, and that people have to go to the very nose, as Merz put it, of the Bundestag to make the point. But let's do that. Let's do that. It's, tempting to try and play some music at this point, which would be like meeting the listeners who haven't decided to come down to camp sort of halfway. But I also feel that, this thing is like streaming live. And if you can't bring yourself to come down and support in any way that you can, especially as a white German, then that's kind of on you. So, we're not going to try and play some cheesy pop rock music. We're going to finish out with something which hopefully inspires more passion and more community commitment and endurance and solidarity. Which is what we need in these times, and indeed have needed and have always needed. It's a great myth that we just got along fine with the market, of course. We're closing out, so I wanted to invite you again to Radio Against Repression, which you can put into any podcast app. We still need a bit of support to keep this thing going, so if you have some access to money, then patreon.com/Radio Against Repression. But we totally appreciate your love in non-financial form, and you can sign up for free there, which means that you get like an email when there's a new show that drops, and we might work towards a newsletter. But in any case, you can find us here on the first Wednesday of every month between 5 and 6 p.m. On 88.4 FM. I think we are coming to some kind of a conclusive moment. Certainly time is already running at the door. So we're just going to finish out with this last track, which is Da Luna by Ala Zalzalni.
And after this track, you're going to have another impression from the Marx reading group from the camp. And after that, you will hear an audio piece from the Lebanese author Amina Hassan about the war in the 90s in Lebanon and about bombs that were spent from Israel getting there. Have fun, listen. We hear us next month. Bye.
Ciao. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks to everyone at camp. Shout out. Peace.
AI. So, Caius.
But why isn't today like this value and tomorrow the other value? Everything. No, it's very not that much.
We can read this again and see actually that this is what Marx is trying to tell us.
For this act merely converts the commodity from its natural form back into its money form. The change must therefore take place in the commodity which is bought in the first act of circulation, MC, but not in its value.
It's the commodity. Say that, you just say that. It's not the very same money, but it's more money. It's more money, exactly. So the money itself stays constant. So why does he even bother saying that? That's so confusing.
I just told you why it is, because people are putting their money in the bank, and then after a few months they make some zinsen, and they think, my money just became more. Like there is some power in many capitalists think that they invest money, bring the means of production, labor, and then some magic happens. They had a good timing. They're good business people. They made a commodity nobody else wanted, or whatever, and that's why they have profit. For example, Milton Friedman thinks that what makes the economy go slower is not enough money in flow. Some kind of economist trying to invest much. You say, if I print enough money in the right place, I can do the economy a favor. They usually deal with those aspects. Marx is not interested in those aspects. Marx is interested in value, because value is a social relation between people. Okay? So he actually tells us, what makes value is not the form of appearance of social relation between people, which is money, but the real social relation between people, which is labor. Okay, Alex, did you record that?
I did, yeah.
So if you want nobody to join this group anymore, this is what you gotta play on your podcast.
You're the best.
Do we need to continue with
this? Did you record that?
Can I go on? Can we go on?
He's always compliment
I wasn't looking for a compliment. Yeah. I was looking to make the people who didn't understand it the last 3 times looking bad. Yalla, go on. Where were we?